Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of Dune Part 2, Denis Villeneuve's 2024 follow-up to his excellent 2021 Part 1, and an adaptation of the second half of Frank Herbert's 1965 sci-fi novel. This film is a true masterpiece with immersive world-building, explosive action, fierce performances, and an unapologetic examination of false messiah mythology that these types of stories typically don't bother challenging. So let's break this down scene by scene for all the details you missed, changes from the book, and the finer artistry that's just worth appreciating. Starting with these opening words, white text on black screen with Sardaukar throat singing blasting out at us. Power over spice is power over all. It's exactly how the 2021 Dune opened, but with a different quote. The difference between these quotes, dreams are messages from the deep versus power over spice is power over all, illustrates the divide between these two films. Part 1 was more contemplative, dealing with Paul Atreides and the Bene Gesserit's dwellings on the future, and the words from the deep indicating that the source of everything might be buried deep in the sand. But in Part 2, power over spice is power over all sets the table for a more combative sequel, with warring sides grasping for control over this universe's most critical natural resource, spice. But the voice we hear is the throat singing of the Sardaukar from Seleucus Secundus. Guess it's a little odd to give this opening vocalization to the Sardaukar, as they are really the Emperor's elite assassins with their own culture disconnected from Arrakis and the Bene Gesserit, but it does sound really cool. But really what we are hearing is the throat singing of Azusa Pacific vocalist Michael Geiger, who did a fascinating interview with a musician named Dmitry Tarkaniukov that you should totally watch. Both guys explain that while this throat singing was described as Mongolian, in fact it's actually more Tibetan inspired. Don't tell that to the country that Warner Brothers is banking on this movie doing really well in. But for the Sardaukar language, while the super talented Game of Thrones conlanger David J. Peterson created most of the languages for Denis Villeneuve's Dune, the vocalist Michael Geiger claimed that he really improvised the Sardaukar words that we actually hear, and he wrote on his website that the sounds are not a language, but really an encoded military battle chant, a specific series of syllables with the consonants purposely removed to render the remaining vowel sounds discernible only to the Sardaukar. I love this idea that both films open with the Sardaukar commenting on Paul Atreides' next moves within their own cryptic shorthand, because as we will see throughout this film, it's a running theme that the story of Paul Atreides is really told by everyone else except Paul Atreides. Told by Princess Irulan's journals, told by Stilgar's prophecies, told by the plotting of the Bene Gesserit, and told by Paul's mother, Lady Jessica, and his sister Alia. But I want to talk about this vocalist because both films credit all the music to Hans Zimmer. But a truth that too often goes ignored in Hollywood is that film composing is actually far more collaborative. And when you see Hans Zimmer's name on a movie, you're actually seeing several ghost composers at Zimmer's Santa Monica-based studio Remote Control. Zimmer himself has gotten better about shouting out his collaborators, and Michael Geiger is credited as a co-writer of Sardaukar chant. Then we hear the voice of Florence Pugh as Princess Irulan of House Corrino, daughter to the Emperor Shaddam IV, played by Christopher Walken. She recaps the events of Part 1, but leaves some details out. She says, Imperial Diary, year 10,191, third comet. The battle for Arrakis took everyone by surprise. There were no witnesses. The Harkonnen operation was perpetrated overnight without warning or declaration of war. By morning, the Atreides were no more. All died in the dark. And Irulan says that there were no witnesses, telling us that the Emperor's deployment of the Sardaukar was a scandalous secret. The author Frank Herbert set Dune in the year 10191 on the Imperial calendar, which would be 21267 AD in Earth's timeline. The stories of Dune are set AG, or after Guild, referring to the founding of the Spacing Guild, which created a monopoly on all space travel. Space travel in Dune is made possible by spice, aka melange, which is consumed by Guild navigators, a strain of super evolved humans mentally conditioned to calculate navigation paths through space and needing melange to do it. Humanity functions this way because of a past Butlerian jihad, which was mankind's war against computers and thinking machines. All of this explains why there are no computers in Dune, no AI, no digital weaponry, and why religious forces based on elements of Christianity and Islam have really taken over all of culture. So we see Harkonnen soldiers torching Atreides corpses that they've piled up, and we see the portrait of Duke Leto Atreides set ablaze. Meanwhile, Princess Irulan plays this board game with her father. This is Chops, which is a 9-level pyramid chess game where, in addition to putting the opponent's king in check, you also try to put the queen piece at the apex. This foreshadows how Irulan is really part of the conspiratorial, matriarchal Bene Gesserit order, manipulating Shaddam and other male heads of houses to do their bidding. We see Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, played by Stellan Skarsgård, honoring his nephew Glasu Raban, played by Dave Bautista. We see banners with the House Harkonnen sigil designed for the 2021 film, which is a kind of barbed sickle. In the text, the Harkonnen sigil is the griffin, House Atreides sigil is the red hawk, and the ruling House Corino is the golden lion. The 2021 film ended with Paul Atreides and Lady Jessica escaping escaping the assault on Arrakeen, which led to the death of Duke Leto Atreides, and the two made their way out into the desert to join the Fremen. Paul defeated Jamis in a duel and joined the tribe as they followed Stilgar, who rode a sandworm deeper into the desert, setting us into this biblical wandering through the desert of the Hebrew tribes as they made their way to a destined promised land. And this film begins with them in that desert as the sun is eclipsed by both of the two moons of Arrakis, which the 2021 film discussed in a scene, the larger one nicknamed the Hand of God for its formation that resembles a fist, the smaller one with the formation that resembles the native desert kangaroo mouse of this planet, which is why they call this moon Muad'Dib, the name that Paul will choose for himself. So in fact, in this scene, Paul is empowered by the moon that will bear his name and a Hand of God watching over him. It casts these opening minutes in this fiery orange glow. But while Paul sleeps, or we think he's sleeping, we get a familiar heartbeat or clock tick sound from the Zimmer remote control team, similar to what we heard in Interstellar, a kind of as Paul is communing with his sister, Alia, which she's still either in an embryonic or fetal state in Jessica's womb. He tells her to go back to the stars to be with her father because he won't have enough time to do what he needs to do before he dies. Villeneuve establishes this film as a recurring dialogue with the baby sister to set up the big reveal of Anya Taylor-Joy as her future adult form on Arrakis with the restored ocean. Because as readers of the Dune series, including Dune Messiah all the way through Children of Dune, they know that Paul Atreides is not the ultimate hero of this story, and that a few minutes from now, Paul will tell Chani that he wasn't sleeping during his conversation with his sister. He was actually really in a kind of trance. One Harkonnen hears the thumper and says the rats are calling a worm. They echo Rabban's pejorative of rat, without realizing that by embracing the Muad'Dib as his moniker, it's actually a compliment for Paul and the Fremen's resourcefulness. After they come upon Jameis's body and hear that thumper, there's kind of a how the hell did Villeneuve do this shot of a Harkonnen soldier just silently floating along that rock formation and then patting himself along it horizontally until he smoothly comes to his feet. Now I assume they did this with wires and just removed them with post, but you know, the shadow without any wires just looks so real. I just point this out because it could look really stupid and really goofy, but the tech in this movie looks so good. So the Fremen snipe these Harkonnens and then it just starts raining bodies. Paul lunges for the Harkonnen dagger at the same time as the other soldier. They fight, and since Paul, who has recently learned how to dance deftly on the sand, has better footing while fighting this heavy-footed Harkonnen, yet while another one is about to get the drop on Paul, Lady Jessica crushes that one's face with a rock. Because Paul, despite being the prophesied hero, actually needs the Bene Gesserit women to take care of him. Now, Denis Villeneuve shot most of this film in IMAX. In an interview with Kevin McCarthy, he said that for the 2021 film, he alternated between IMAX 1:3:1 ratio for outdoor desert scenes that emphasize nature, and then switched to 2:9:1 ratio for indoor scenes that focused on technology. But Villeneuve said that for the sequel, most of it takes place outside, so most of it is in IMAX, and so that it would be less distracting for anything indoors, which is just a bit wider than the 1:8:5:1 that you may remember for 2012's The Avengers. So Stilgar and the other Fremen drain the fluids from the Harkonnen still suits. He says that their bodies have filthy water, full of chemicals, but good enough for cooling systems. And when Jessica begins to retch at this, he warns, don't let it out. And then he swears when she vomits, from pregnancy puke to tears, as we will see later, any premature release of any body fluid is sacrilegious to these Fremen. Stilgar leads the group to a Sitch Tabor. A Sitch refers to a cave where the Fremen gather, and its name actually comes from Sitch, from the 15th century Zaporozhian Cossacks, who inhabited what's now the lands of Ukraine. Some Fremen mistrust Paul as a spy who killed Jamis, but others call him the Lisan al-Gaib, showing how the Bene Gesserit propaganda has already taken root, but there is still work to do. Paul eats the Fremen food and experiences a vision showing his father's portrait rising. The Fremen Shishakil jokes that it's too spicy for the foreigner, which is just a fun parallel to our world where international food is just sometimes judged as too spicy for Caucasian palates. I say this as someone who loves spicy food, and it just kills me when I'm watching Great British Baking Show and Paul Hollywood's always like, there's too much garlic in this focaccia. To which I scream at my TV, it's because your cuisine is so based on World War II food rationing that you had to adopt the culinary traditions of your mortal enemies, the French, to make your food palatable. But anyway, in this case, in this scene, the spice is literally the spice, the psychedelic melange. Stilgar shows Jessica the vast well into which all liquidated Fremen are deposited, making 38 million decaliters that they plan to use to terraform the planet and to restore its green paradise. And Stilgar tells Lady Jessica that they want to make her the new Reverend Mother, and it just kind of shows the artificiality of this myth building, because Stilgar only wants Jessica to become the Reverend Mother because she's Paul's mother, which would support the claim that Paul is Lisan al-Gaib. Remember, this society is derived from traditions like Christianity, with Jesus and his mother Mary. In order for there to be a Messiah, there has to be a Messiah's mother, who is also in an important role. Though we should point out that Stilgar and the others use prayer mats, which evokes Islam. In 1965, Frank Herbert wrote Dune with various Arabic terms as a commentary on the wars of the Middle East, where a sense of religious entitlement to land land intersects with an outside, insane economic interest on a natural resource. And here we are in 2024, and it's only got more relevant. When the stakes are this high, humanity's worst natures will always prevail, because everyone thinks that God is on their side. So before she's about to undergo this spice agony by consuming the water of life, Jessica calms herself by saying fear is a mind killer. And I think it's interesting that this water of life glows the same vibrant shade of blue as these characters' eyes do when they consume the melange. So she gyrates, and the fluid goes inside of her and prematurely awakens Aaliyah's mind, giving mother and daughter this supernatural insight, but also centuries of pain and suffering. Pain that Jessica says only women can handle. Stilgar sends Paul out in the desert and warns him about the jinn, demonic desert spirits. So jinn is an Arabic word from Muslim mythology referring to spirits that are ranked lower than angels but take human and animal forms. The English language derived from the word jinn, the word genie. And while Paul thinks he sees the jinn of Jameis, it's actually Johnny here to help him survive this Fremen rite of passage. This movie begins by depicting this as genuine love, but by the end we learn that Paul is just using her and appropriating the Fremen to get ahead. We see a little Moeedi mouse skipping up to Paul's straw as he is buried in the sand to raid a Harkonnen spice harvester. I love this scene. If there's one film that I think Dune Part 2 has the most in common with, it's David Lean's 1962 masterpiece Lawrence of Arabia, which shows T.E. Lawrence's exploits with tribal groups in Syria, leading raids on shipments of the Ottoman Turks. He is an outsider guided by an unimpeachable idealism that nothing is written. Both that film and this one demand to be seen on big screens with gorgeous desert imagery and groundbreaking uses of lighting and scale. This scene reminds me so much of the train raid sequences that we saw in Lawrence of Arabia. The Fremen rely on their quickness on the sand, shielding themselves with parts of the harvester, and most of all, just good old-fashioned teamwork. Like Paul draws the fire, he distracts the shooter on the aerial craft, and there's this great shot where the shooter focuses his scope back on Chani, who has already lowered the RPG from her fire, and the Harkonnen turns to see that projectile burrowing through the shield, and boom! It reminds me of Spielberg's shot in Saving Private Ryan, where the Nazi sniper has a delayed response to seeing Private Jackson firing right back at him. And we are now seeing how Paul has smartly played this, refusing Stilgar's claims earlier that Jessica's resistance to the poison fit the prophecy that Chani knows the Bene Gesserit invented, and instead proves his worth to the Fremen as a desert survivor and a warrior to win over the skeptics. He earns the title of Fedayeen fighter, coming from the Arabic Fedayeen, meaning those who sacrifice themselves. Stilgar gives him the surname of Usul, the base of the pillar, and Paul chooses for his first name the Muad'Dib, but he also plays the smart because he claims to not know what the name of the smart desert mouse is, and he asks the room. Despite in part 1, we saw him watching lecture recordings about this animal. He just plays dumb so that they will like him more. And at this point, Paul chooses to remove his House Atreides ring, which I see as a form of deception. He is hiding his nobility from them. Dune is almost here, and if you're like us, you're counting down to when we finally get to see Paul Atreides hang 10 on a sandworm. And luckily, we have the perfect watch to keep tabs on our favorite Fremen, thanks to this incredible collab between Hamilton, Warner Brothers, and Legendary Pictures. Behold. Wow. So Denis Villeneuve's and Dune's prop master Doug Harlocker asked Hamilton's watchmakers to design the dial of the wrist device for the film. For those of us who don't call Arrakis home, Hamilton has made 2 watches with a distinct sci-fi flair. The Ventura Edge Dune limited edition watch has a black dial with a blue digital display on a sleek stainless steel case with black PVD coating. Only 2,000 of these watches will be produced, making them true collector's items. There's also the Ventura XXL blue Dune design, which has a blue sci-fi iconography as a backdrop behind brass, hour, minute, and second hands, and only 3,000 of these will be made. Hamilton watches have been featured in more than 500 movies and TV shows since 1932, with custom pieces playing a pivotal role in several Hollywood blockbusters. Striving to shape authentic characters and storylines through its timepieces, Hamilton even designed the first branded watch to be featured in a video game. Now, Dune is part of that lineage. I can't believe they sent me one of these. This is immediately one of the coolest items in my collection. To get yours before they run out, click the link in the description. He describes to Chani his home world of Caladan. He says, where you see sand here, imagine water. Denis Villeneuve visually equates worm riding in this movie with surfing. The speed with which Stilgar glides past evokes a surfer or like a parasailor gliding past an observer sitting on the sand dunes of a beach, which makes something that could look really goofy instead look undeniably athletic and powerful and cinematic. Chani tells Paul that her name is Souheila, which means desert spring, of course foreshadowing the role of her tears in Paul's resurrection and transformation. Paul has dreams of being in the South and following some female figure in a future holy war as billions dive survive starvation. This woman he later interprets to be his mother, but it could also be Chani, who appears later in a different dream scarred by radiation burns, or even his sister, Aaliyah, who appears in a later vision by the shore. Who knows, it could also be Irulan. Paul doesn't know which woman to follow, but Paul faces the final test of summoning a Shai-Hulud. While he initially plants the thumper on the crest of the ridge, Chani whispers to go lower, and Paul listens and goes down and pounds this sand, which gives off a deeper rumble. And this calls the biggest sandworm any of them have ever seen. And I love that initially they don't even notice the worm sign in the distance. They just kind of think it's just another peak or a storm, because it could never possibly be that big. This entire sequence is awesome. It's shot to mirror a surfer rushing to catch his first wave and then struggling to get his feet up on the board. They constructed pieces of the sandworm so that they could show it in close-up. So here we see its slits, its nostrils, its scaly skin. We see the worm as Paul sees it in this moment. Timothée Chalamet said that he was blasted with wind turbines and sand and said it took 3 months in total to shoot this. Denis Villeneuve identified this particular shot of Paul finally standing up on the worm, the close-up of his feet, as his favorite shot in the film. Now, Denis Villeneuve has gotten some heat in the past week for his distaste of dialogue in films. He said that he blames television writing for making dialogue in movies too abundant. I think he was misunderstood, because obviously Denis Villeneuve loves sound and he loves communication in his movies. Arrival is all about communication. But I think what he's saying is that most films' crowning moments, like this moment here with Paul and the Shai-Hulud, are sequences where just the shots and the sound come together in a way where we don't need characters talking us through it. Good screenwriting is not just snappy dialogue. Good screenwriting is the math of story structure that isn't as sexy, and just the screenwriter being in tune with the audience's emotions from story beat to story beat. And there's so many other ways you can manipulate emotion than just dialogue. Paul says it's heartbreaking the way the Bene Gesserit have manipulated the people of Arrakis.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
After the Fremen hit a spice depot, Rabban foolishly rushes into Fremen territory, and with all the Harkonnens, you'll notice that they always wear visors and shields over their eyes. They're foot soldiers, even their pilots. And it's because their home world of Giedi Prime is heavily polluted and has a sun that emits light within the IR spectrum, referring to infrared, which affects their vision and makes them super sensitive to the light on Arrakis. Rabban tries to tune his eyes to the sunlight. Meanwhile, these other soldiers are puking, they raise their visors, and this shows the biggest disadvantage of the Fremen. And as a result of this, we see how the power has shifted. Before it was Paul hiding from the Harkonnens in the sand. Now he is all around them. He is the literal Muad'Dib. He's hopping and rolling in the sand. We only see Paul's face when an explosion lightens it, seeing this spectral form the way a nearly blind Harkonnen would. So who is as blind as a rat now? Meanwhile, Emperor Shaddam IV talks to his daughter Irulan.
If this Muad'Dib is a religious figure, you can't use direct force. Repression only makes a religion flourish. You'll only end up humiliating yourself.
You underestimate my Sardaukar.
You underestimate the power of faith.
I think it's saying something that the script is so confident with its inner politics that even the great Christopher Walken just disappears into this role as a weakened and baiting politician. Irulan is part of the Bene Gesserit coven.
Muad'Dib means kangaroo mouse. An unusual war name for a Fremen. What if Paul Atreides were still alive?
Enough!
Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam says that the Bene Gesserit do not hope, they plan. And they have another prospect. Baron Vladimir Harkonnen's youngest nephew, Thade Rautha, played by Austin Butler. Austin Butler played Elvis Presley, and you might remember the character was played by Sting in the David Lynch Dune. But the idea is that the character just has to be a rock star, and Austin Butler totally delivers here. He worked with vocal coaches to emulate the vocal style that Stellan Skarsgård used for this film, and it took him several weeks to shed the voice that he had acquired for Elvis. And at this point, the film shifts to Giedi Prime. Outside in the gladiator arena, we shift into monochrome. According to Entertainment Weekly, Villeneuve, in this movie's cinematographer, the great Greg Fraser, who also shot the first film and The Batman and Zero Dark 30, Rogue One, and The Mandalorian pilot, they decided to shoot Giedi Prime in black and white to convey the infrared spectrum of the low-light black sun of this planet. They actually used infrared cameras to shoot this sequence. Villeneuve said that he wanted this world to feel binary, fascist, insectoid without nuances. The fireworks overhead looked like ink blots, as those would be the highest contrast pyrotechnics that would be visible to these crowds. Now, this match is supposed to be staged for Thade Rautha to win. The third fighter, we see that Baron Vladimir creates a special challenge for Thade Rautha on his birthday to prove himself, because Thade Rautha is a masochist. He likes a challenge and he likes the pain. The Bene Gesserit have sent Lady Margot Fenring, played by Léa Seydoux, to bed Thade Rautha to secure their contingency for Arrakis. And what we think is a seduction is actually a Gom Jabbar test, like what Paul had gone through in the opening of the first film. film. But since it's all a black leather, sexualized atmosphere, the very idea of a pain test is something that Fade Rotha enjoys. So you can see how the Bene Gesserit would be very impressed by that, because I think at the end of the day, they just view all men as disgusting anyway. Meanwhile, Paul reunites with Gurney Halleck, Josh Brolin, who survived the assault on House Atreides to become a spice smuggler. The instrument he plays is the balisette, a 9-string descendant of the zither. Paul says, "I recognize your footsteps, old man," recalling their old training. I just like this idea that Paul is kind of transforming into a sandworm, in a way, buried in the sand, sensing footsteps above. Paul tells Gurney that he has foreseen billions dying because of him.
Because you lose control.
Because I gain it.
Gurney reveals to Paul the location of the House Atreides atomic arsenal. It's unlocked only by Paul's DNA. He unlocks it by sticking his hand in a slot, which visually reminds me of the Gom Jabbar box test. Kind of like reaching into slots like this is how Paul gains power. There's probably, like a sexual analog to that, but I'm not going to get into it. Lady Jessica makes it to the south, where the worm handler shows her a baby sandworm, which she drowns in water to extract the water of life. Sitch Tabor is destroyed by the Harkonnens, which is a war crime that leads to this Fremen War Council in the south. So Aaliyah and Jessica were right. Had Paul not stayed in the north and escalated everything, Sitch Tabor might not have been destroyed, and he would have expedited his destined ascendancy within the Fremen. He also would not have found the Atreides atomic arsenal, so there might have been overall less destruction. So Paul goes south and he drinks the water of life, and he sees all of the future and the past, and then this hooded figure walking up a sand dune to see a vast ocean of water on Arrakis. That voice that we heard earlier returns, "My brother, my dearest brother, you are not prepared for what is to come." And she turns, and yes, it's Anya Taylor-Joy as Aaliyah. She sheds a tear as she whispers, "I'm with you, I love you." Because now that Arrakis has oceans, we could totally spare tears for those we love. Now, Dune the novel shows Aaliyah's birth. It takes place over a longer period of time, and the young girl has a role to play in the final conflict in the throne room. This movie, though, leaves her in the womb the entire time, and we only really see her when she's in the womb and in this future vision form played by Anya Taylor-Joy. They wanted to bring in a big movie star to just kind of show us that there's a future franchise. But when Frank Herbert wrote Dune, he was dismayed that so many readers identified Paul Atreides as a hero, when really the whole point of Dune was for Paul Atreides to be seen as a tragic hero, an artificial messiah, a commentary on Messiah myth. So Herbert went on to write Dune Messiah, followed by Children of Dune, God Emperor of Doom, Heretics of Dune, and Chapter House Dune. These novels explore Paul's coming holy war, and Aaliyah takes a much bigger role, and I'm not going to spoil what happens, but it gets weird, but it's awesome. So really, the Dune Part 2 film repurposes the character of Aaliyah to make her this kind of future vision, this voice that guides Paul from inside his mother, and kind of another woman that Lady Jessica can have this dialogue with. And it makes it creepier in a way that she's still inside the womb for the entire film. There's something just unnatural and wrong about it, and I think it makes for a better story, because it really just feels like witchcraft is at work here. So Chani awakens Paul using her desert spring tears, which she places into the water of life and places on his lips. This gives the Fremen an artificial resurrection to convince them that he must be the Lisan al-Gaib. Paul, now awakened, confronts his mother and confirms that he knows the truth, that she is the daughter of Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, making Paul both an Atreides and a Harkonnen. And I love how Lady Jessica at this point has just transformed for the second half of the film, now wearing robes upon which costumer Matt Reitsma hand-printed the Fremen alphabet. So Paul enters the sacred Fremen prayer room and commands attention in this room by telling each of them their past and their destinies, revealing to a skeptic the original Fremen name of the planet, Dune. The one time we hear Dune said in this movie, and everyone just loses their shit. I love this scene because it's a difficult thing to show. It does not show us the rise of a hero. It is showing us the tragic fall of a monster. Paul's speech is a performance. He is acting. He's playing a part. He's reading from a script. So Irulan and the Bene Gesserit join the Emperor to go to Arrakis to answer Paul's challenge. Costume designer Jacqueline West took inspiration from the Tarot Queen of Swords figure and West's own Catholic schooling to create the habits of these Bene Gesserit nuns. For Irulan, she made this form-fitting armored headdress to look like the shape of the habits that younger nuns would wear, and to fortify this character as really the moral compass of the film. Paul and the Fremen prepare to surround the city of Arrakeen, and they prepare for battle. Gurney Halleck deploys atomic warheads, and they bomb the spice plant beside the city, what the rest of the Imperium would rightly consider an act of terror. This is a coup. After the dust clears, a new wall of sand appears before the Sardaukar, and the sand beneath their feet slides, and then, boom, the gaping mouths of the Shai Hulud appear with their whale-like baleen sucking them in. All of them surfed by Fremen flying Atreides banners. Chani leads in the ground forces, and there's an amazing shot where she fights Sardaukar soldiers and finishes one off by turning back to camera in this fierce pose. This is exactly the vision that Paul had in the first film, showing himself fighting in a future war, but now Chani has taken his place because she is the one fighting the good fight. Paul's forces break into the throne room, and he marches right up to Vladimir, greets him as grandfather, and stabs him in the neck. Meanwhile, Gurney kills Rabin, getting revenge for Duke Leto. With the other great house's warships arriving, Paul brings in the Emperor and threatens to blow the spice fields. Reverend Mother Mohaim warns,
"Consider what you're about to do, Paul Atreides."
Silence!
and commands her with the voice that typically only the Bene Gesserit can summon. Paul demands a duel from the Emperor, and Fade Rotha steps forward as the Emperor's champion. Paul salutes him.
May thy knife chip and shatter.
And the duel is so sleekly choreographed and shot, where Greg Fraser lights them from behind with the dawning sun. Really, the only one unnatural move is where Paul barrel rolls mid-air. The rest of it looks real and it feels vicious, but the duel enters its final stage when Fade Rotha looks at Chani and asks, "This your pet? Any special attention for the pet?" And we should definitely take that as an insult, but we should also remember that this psychopath also kept 3 females in his chamber as pets and fed them like pets. Paul gets stabbed in the side, but as Fade Rotha approaches for the kill, Paul stabs him. It's an understated ending to the duel, and it feels almost treacherous, and that is the point. Stilgar just punctuates it as a victory with a breathless, "Oh, listen, al-Ghalib!" But this is wrong, because Paul has secured this victory through political manipulations and religious fanaticism, not through any moral courage. We shouldn't feel good right now. With the novel Dune, Frank Herbert wrote, and Denis Villeneuve understands as the director of this film, that this is really the story of how easily large populations are manipulated and how easily we can convince ourselves that we're the hero. The great houses declare war, beginning the destructive holy war that we will see in Dune Messiah most likely. But I love that this film ends with Chani, who stays on Arrakis and summons a Shai-Hulud. Her feeling of betrayal that she felt with Paul is the moral bitter taste in our mouths that we are supposed to judge this story with. While we heard Paul snap at his mother earlier that this story was not hope, this shot of Chani represents hope. It's Luke looking at the binary sunset. It's T.E. Lawrence gazing out at the horizon and defiantly declaring nothing is written. Dune Part 2 might very well end up being my favorite movie of 2024, and for me it is up there with The Empire Strikes Back as all-time greatest sequels or part 2s of a trilogy. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe to all 3 channels on the New Rockstars Network. I'm Erik Voss. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.